STEM City USA Healthy Doses series is your passport to a balanced lifestyle. Hosted by Dr. Tiffany Anderson and presented in the Boston Scientific Auditorium. And now, Dr. Tiffany Anderson.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday, and welcome to another episode of Healthy Doses. My name is Rayondon Kennedy, and I am your STEM City moderator for today's show. Healthy Doses is brought to you by our partners at Boston Scientific, and it is streaming live in the STEM City metaverse right now as we speak. Each week, we try to give you tips, tools, and thoughts to help you live your life to the best, to help you carry out your day-to-day in the best way possible. And we do that by listening to the wonderful advice from our host, Dr. Tiffany Anderson. Dr. Anderson, how are we doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Ray. How are you?
I can't complain. It's a beautiful Saturday. I almost said Sunday. Beautiful Saturday. I gotta get my days right. Dr. Anderson, what are we talking about today?
Yes, so today we are talking about defense mechanism.
Yeah,
this is a good one. Defense mechanism is one of those things that we all have and we all share. So I just want to just start out with just picking one in particular, one that probably is the most common or the most well-known, which is denial. I want us to think about a time where we are in complete denial about something that was brought to our attention, something that others around us, right, said, like, this is our experience of you or your behavior, and that we were unable to accept, right? Think about those times, right? So denial is just a refusal to acknowledge certain facts about a particular situation. I have been in denial about a lot of things, and we'll talk about why this defense and others come up in our lives, right? Why denial may be one of our primary defenses, right? When we're unable to accept the truth in the moment because of how our body responds, right? How our body is triggered by the information, and how our unconscious thoughts, our unconscious kind of adaptive behaviors kind of pop up, right? And kind of show its ugly head. And we recognize that defensive mechanisms are created as an adaptive survival tool that later becomes maladaptive, right? As we get older and we learn and we know better. And so just think of your defenses as in this moment, but think about the one that a lot of us struggle with is denial. When things come up, when folks point out certain issues or certain behaviors and we're just unable to accept it in the moment, think about how denial is there to protect us, right? To kind of guard our hearts and our anxiety and minimize that feeling in the moment. And that's how defenses work. No judgment. We have all done it. We may still be practicing it, but we're going to talk more about the various defense mechanisms and how they're showing up in our lives. So after this commercial break from our sponsors by Boston Scientific, we'll get back into it.
Dr. Anderson, I'm excited to jump into today's topic. But before we get started, I just want to remind everybody, if you're watching, we are live in the metaverse. And one of the great advantages of the metaverse is that we are interactive, which means right now, if you want to say hi to me, I can see that and I can say hi to you right now if you're watching live. And so to communicate, if you have any questions throughout the show, if you have any examples, you want to share a story, you can do so anonymously, or you can give your name by scanning that QR code right above Dr. Tiffany Anderson's head. You take your phone, open your camera, and just hover over it, put it on your screen, and you should get a link. If you are watching on your phone right now, it's still fine. There's inside the comments, there is a link that I provided that takes you to the same place. And so we love to hear from you. We love to interact with you. And if you're inside the STEM City La Familia Health and Wellness Auditorium, there's a chat button. You can communicate with everybody who's watching right now. So feel free, drop us a line in the chats wherever you're watching, scan the code. We love to hear from you. We love to answer any of the questions you have on the topic. Defense mechanisms, Dr. Anderson. This is such a great topic because I feel like it applies literally to all of us.
Yeah.
And whether we're old, young, you gave some great examples about denial. And the first thing that came to my mind was just like my childhood. I don't know if you know this, but I have 3 younger brothers. And so we always got into a lot of trouble with each other. And so usually when I hear my mom call my name, I didn't do it. I don't know what it was. I don't even know what it is. I don't even know what she's calling for.
Right.
It might just be to, pick up something off the floor. And like my first initial reaction is I didn't do it. And although I don't verbalize it now, a lot of times when I hear somebody yell, no, wasn't me. I didn't. Oh, that's not what you're asking about. Oh, okay, cool. And so it's ingrained.
It's unconscious. See how it comes up?
Yeah.
It could be anyone calling your name, but you see how it just comes up of like, it's all unconscious. So yeah, I just want to say that. Yeah.
And like you were saying, it's made to protect, because I don't know what it was, but I didn't want to get in trouble. Somebody else did it. And so, Dr. Anderson, jump into this conversation. Let's give a real definition of defense mechanisms to kind of clearly define our topic today.
Yeah. So we understand defense mechanisms as a mental process, right? That's initiated to typically like control or avoid conflict or anxiety, or even the thought of like preserving one's self-esteem, right? Oftentimes this is unconscious. It usually happens on an unconscious level. Ray just gave a great example of how something can start in childhood, right? And it carries over. And so it's a mental process. There's ones that we create to minimize angst, avoid this conflict that happens within our bodies, within our minds, and to preserve our sense of self, right? Our self-esteem in the moment, because certain things can challenge that, right? And so, the example of denial, right? If I'm saying that, you're not performing well at this job, that takes a hit at my sense of self, my self-esteem, right? And so the defense mechanism of denial is a good one, because it's, naturally, unconsciously, it'll say, no, that's not me. The customer was wrong. The boss is jealous of me. My colleagues just simply hate me because I'm the best at what I do, right? That's an example of that denial that may come up, right? So it's unconscious, and it's, the overall understanding is we just want to avoid angst in our bodies. And that's how we create them naturally.
What are some other ways, or I guess reasons, like why, like obviously we have these to protect ourselves. And so, we learn these, how does that, trying to make sure I pose this question.
Yeah.
Why do we have it? Like, why is that a mechanism, whether we talk about, different school of thoughts or evolution, but why do we have defense mechanisms?
Yeah. Like, why does it exist? So from our understanding, from, this information surrounding defense mechanisms, let's be clear, is Freud's work and his daughter, Anna. They've done a lot of work surrounding defense mechanisms, right? So this is a theory. Their understanding is we use defense mechanisms to simply just protect ourselves from feelings of shame or guilt or anxiety. And their understanding is that it usually happens um, when we as the individual feels threatened, or when our id or super ego becomes too demanding. So let me break those down so we can have more information
I
about.
was about to say, I was coming back up. It's like, hold on, wait a second.
Right. I'm not going to just go off and not explain them. Right. So from Freud's understanding, he believed that the mind was made up of three components. Right. We had our id, ego, and super ego. The id is understood as just our basic needs, like our impulses, our desires. A good example of the id is, think about a newborn baby that cries when they want something, right? They have no consciousness of how tired the mother is, uh, how depleted the father is. They want their needs met, period, right? That is the id. It is all about impulses and desires. That's all it cares about. And for a baby, that's all that's needed. I can't communicate besides crying and getting my needs met. So that is our id. Ray, you can understand why the id doesn't work for adults. And you know what I'm saying? It's for a baby, beautiful. For a 30-year-old, absolutely not, right? And so that's the id. So keep that in mind, because the idea is that the id and the super ego are at odds. So next we have our ego. So our ego is responsible for how we function in the world, how we react to our world, and how we make sense of it around us, right? So the ego controls the demands and impulses of the id, right? And it's housed in our unconscious. I mean, it's housed in our consciousness, so we're very aware. You're very aware of how you operate and navigate in the world. You're aware of your impulses, your desires, but you're always managing those, right? So the understanding is that the ego is always managing the id that says, "Oh, I want that. I don't have the money, so I'm gonna steal it." The ego says, "We don't steal in this society. We can't just take what we want," right? So it's always managing those things. Then we have our super ego, and that's all about the rules that we learn throughout our lives, what is used to control the ego. So the super ego is controlling the ego, and the ego is controlling the id. The super ego is also the home to the expectations of the ego, right? So the way we should behave and think. Um, and so it can get a little funky, but again, the ego is just around consciousness. It's about what we think about the world around us, our external world, and how we kind of make sense of it. Super ego is all about expectations, societal norms, societal expectations, right? What you should be doing, what's not morally correct, our values. Does that make sense? So that is what's always that's like the third layer, is like keeping us as balanced as possible. And so when the id and the super ego are at odds, their understanding is when those defense mechanisms come up. Yeah.
That's a great connection, because I was definitely going to say, I remember learning about the id, ego, super ego, but how does that play into our conversation on defense mechanism? But
Yeah.
that was a great tie-in. And so, Dr. Anderson, I know we talked a little bit about denial, but what are
Mhm.
some other types of defense mechanisms we as humans kind of display to kind of protect ourselves?
Yeah. So I'm gonna give us a few. And again, just be present.
There are many.
Yeah, there's many. So and I'm sure we can create our own, Ray, to be honest, because each individual can say, like, I have these, but it's also something that happens when my mom calls my name. I don't know if that's a part of the list, but you know what I mean.
Hmm.
It's so, but there's a lot. I'm gonna get up a few. Some, I try to stay in the area that are kind of that I see the most, and the people that I work with. that I've experienced the most, that are just kind of like the most common, that folks can like understand and connect with, right? So first we have projection. This is a big one. This is a big one. I see this all the time. I have been there and I've called myself out. That says I am projecting. So projection is taking your own unacceptable feelings, right? Or thoughts, and putting them on another person as if they belong to them, right? Um, so I can say like, Ray, you know you don't like that person. You know you don't care for her. And you're like,
Actually, I do.
I love Nancy. Nancy's amazing. And I'm like, but you really hate her. You hate her though. And you're like, kind of like her, right? That is projection. Those are my unacceptable thoughts. But because the defense comes up that says, you don't say that, right? The ego, super ego says, you know, we don't, in this society, we don't really talk about people aloud, right? That's not acceptable socially, right? So a defense says, okay, well, I'm gonna put it on Ray and act as if it's him so I can release that angst, but it's not. Ray doesn't have a problem with Susie, I do, right? I'm just projecting
Nancy.
that. Oh,
We're talking. We don't like Nancy. No.
and Susie or
And
Susie.
Susie.
Sorry, that's too
Go
many
ahead.
people. That's the pregnancy brain that you see. I'm sorry, Susan and Susie. Okay, we don't like Nancy. Okay, and we are putting that off on Ray. That is how we understand projection. Unacceptable emotions that we put off on another person and act as if they belong to them. And we have to be really careful about that though, because a lot of people are impressionable and they'll think it's them. Like, damn, I didn't know I didn't like Nancy, right? And so I didn't know I didn't care for this. I didn't know like this was bad or unacceptable. So we have to be careful with that, and recognize, when we're doing it. And so I gave an example. We can move on. Another one, we see a lot. It's called displacement. This is when an individual has let me break this down. So it occurs when the response to initial target is considered unacceptable or impossible. So a more suitable target is found. A good example of this is if you're mad at your mother, Ray, we talked about your mom. If you're mad at your mom, she accused you of doing something and you want to scream and yell and say really nasty things to her, but you can't, right? It is unacceptable or impossible or dangerous. And so you don't. So instead, you turn to your baby brother and you say, it's all your fault. You did it. I hate you. All these nasty things. That is called displacement. Your anger is not with your baby brother. It is with your mother. But because that target is not acceptable, you bring it to someone else that is more acceptable, or they can't harm you, or you know what I mean? They're just kind of like they're an easier target. They're an easier target. So that is displacement. Again, we know it. We know what it looks like. Similar to your boss yelling at you. Can't say nothing to your boss, but that darn Nancy.
We can take it out on Nancy.
Take it out on Nancy because she doesn't have the power to fire you. See what I mean? Yeah. That's for Nancy.
I can tell you right now, with younger brothers, that took place a lot. But my baby brother is now 6'5", probably very much heavier than me. Yeah. I don't play those games anymore.
A little differently, right? You can't do that.
The situations has changed a bit.
Yes, I love
baby brother's not a baby.
It's not a baby. That's not a baby. Yep, same with me. My baby brother is not a baby. So it was easy when we were little. Mm-hmm. Not anymore. Physically. Anywho, he's still like, So another one is repressing. You see repressing, as kind of like someone repressing like a memory or a feeling or a thought that is like no longer accessible in the client's consciousness. So it's not that these things don't exist, because they do, but the client is just not conscious of it. So it may show up in like dreams, or flashbacks, or thoughts of other things or people or objects, but they're not conscious of the actual experience. And so we see that a lot with like trauma. Someone that with a lot of trauma oftentimes has like gaps in their childhood because they blocked out certain things. So certain events or certain experiences are just not conscious anymore. And so it can happen. You can see certain like flashbacks, or they're watching something and then they get a flash or image of something that is in their unconscious that is kind of trying to come up. Because again, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that it's not conscious in the moment. So we see repressing. We see that a lot. And again, a lot of times around like trauma. And so we're going to jump into our commercial break at this moment. But when we come back, we'll give a few more examples and jump right back into it. Alrighty. So sorry, Ray.
Sorry, I had the wrong setting.
Right.
So, welcome back, everybody. We are right in the middle of a great conversation on defense mechanisms. And before we went to break, we were talking about the different types. And so we talked about projection, displacement, and repression so far. We talked a little bit earlier about denial. And Dr. Anderson, let's go through a couple more, just to kind of give you examples of defense mechanisms and kind of how they show up in our everyday lives.
Perfect. Yes. So let's give a few more. I'm actually really enjoying these because I see them in everything I do. We talked about denial earlier. We recognize denial as a refusal to acknowledge certain facts about a situation, right? Next, this is one that I actually enjoy as well. Makes me smile because I know we all do this. It's called undoing, right? So it refers to a behavior when an individual ruminates on a previous event. So they constantly are replaying what happened and what they would change after the fact, right? Because that helps them to protect them against certain feelings and emotions, right? And so think of a time where you had an issue with a person, and in that moment you felt as if you didn't speak up or you didn't have the words to say what you wanted to say. And then you go home and you ruminate over it for hours and hours, and you say, I should have said this, I would have said this. And you play yourself to be a bit bigger, a bit louder than you were, because that's a way to protect yourself from the angst, right, of the moment and of the experience. And so that's undoing. And I know we do that, and I know I do that. Sometimes I even create imaginary scenarios in my head just to do this defense mechanism. Yep, that's a little transparency for you. Next, we have splitting. So splitting refers to a mechanism where an individual is considered either good or bad. Uh, Another example of that is like black or white thinking. Um, it's extremes, right? They're either good or bad. There's really no middle ground or no, balance to it, right? Um, it happens. We see this happen a lot in childhood, um, and it can develop into like poor development of self, right? Where the individual or the child, later adult, has a really difficult time seeing folks, um, for just being human and having positive and negative characteristics, or characteristics that they may align with and not align with, right? But this, think about a time where you're like, I love Nancy. I love Nancy. And then Nancy corrects you during a board meeting and you hate her, right? She's not a good person. She's a terrible person. And she fooled you the entire time, right? That is splitting. That is splitting. Instead of talking it through with Nancy, recognizing that she didn't mean any harm, or what, right? Yeah, it's one or the other. Yeah. And then lastly, we have suppression. And I wanted to talk about that because it can be a bit confusing with repression, right? Or repressing. So suppression is obviously a defense mechanism, but it's unlike repression because um, repression is unconscious, right? We talked about that. And it's an attempt to kind of prevent certain memories or flashbacks or thoughts from entering the consciousness. Suppression happens on a conscious level, in an effort to avoid certain thoughts or feelings or behavior, and to keep them. So they're aware of the traumatic event, they remember it, they recall it, they just don't care to think about it, right? So they try to suppress it consciously, knowing that it's still there and it's still present. Whereas repression is unconscious, so they don't even remember it. And it's not an intentional act, it just is. And so that is our last one in regards to this list, right? This is not exhaustive, there's so many more, but I just wanted to provide a few.
That's interesting with suppressive. I just saw a movie this weekend,
Hmm.
and one of the main characters dealt with a lot of trauma in that person's life.
Mhm.
And every time they tried to bring it up, she avoided it. She went the other way. She did all these other things.
Yeah.
Um, and you saw kind of how that suppression kind of comes out throughout the movie,
Mhm.
which I thought is really. But when you apply it to like your real life, when you're trying to avoid things and you bottle it up, like those things can really come back to that can have consequences in other areas of your life when you suppress. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
kind of on that same line of thought,
Mhm.
when we talk about defense mechanisms, we often think about a lot of negative thoughts and a lot of or negative situations or reactions,
Mhm.
but when the nature of defense is really to protect you.
Mhm.
And so we
Mhm.
talked about a lot of negatives, when we're going through those examples, negative situations. We're trying to avoid this. We're trying to, stop dark thoughts or whatever it is that you're doing, or trying to avoid consequences. But are there positive uh, consequences, positive ways that defense mechanisms can help you in your life?
Mhm. Yeah, I think, see, the thing with defense mechanisms, is that they help with our survival. So they oftentimes come from a place of survival, right?
Mhm.
I said earlier when we started, defense mechanisms they begin adaptive, and that just means it helps us to um, recognize our environment and change accordingly, to what we need to survive. And so um, the circumstances around that, though, oftentimes may not be positive, but the ways in which they help us is in the moment. Because if I have a tumultuous kind of household or things like that, I may learn how to utilize my words well. I may learn how to people please. I may learn how to silence my voice. And all those, although we know like in the long run, those aren't good, at that moment, they were part of our survival and they protected us and they did a great job at getting us through, right? And so with defense mechanism, the purpose of these functions is to protect the individual from being disturbed by excessively painful feelings, right? Drives or ideas. So recognize with our bodies, all they want to do is survive. That's all they want to do, and that's their job. They're going to survive. That's why repression happens. Because if something is too painful or too traumatic, the brain and the body will say, he doesn't need to remember that, right? Because if she does, that can kill her. If he does, that can really kill her. Or it's too painful, or she won't, or he won't be able to move forward. So we're going to block it. We're going to act like it doesn't exist. And so that's how it is a positive, right? It starts from adaptive and it turns into maladaptive, right? Because now I'm an adult and I'm not in that same household. But when I hear criticism or I hear constructive criticism, or if I hear someone that's concerned about my behavior, I respond in a negative way because when I was a child, someone saying something about me was always negative, right? So as an adult, I can't hear it in a healthy way. I can't process it in a healthy way. Now it is maladaptive, but it started as adaptive, right? And so, yeah, the way it starts is oftentimes not the way it ends, but we are just doing our best. And that's what I try to kind of keep reiterating throughout the show. And it's like we're all really doing our best to survive and to make sense of our world around us, and to learn new things and to, do better once we know better. And so that's how it continues to be an advantage for us, especially in childhood. But we're responsible now for figuring it out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for every light, there's a dark, right? Defense mechanisms should be, positive, should protect us. They should keep us safe mentally or otherwise. But like I said, there's also a dark side. So what are some, I guess, signs of unhealthy defense mechanisms, or using it incorrectly, or using it in a way that's not to your advantage?
Yeah, good question. So, if you're constantly accusing others of doing things that you'd like to be doing but can't admit to, kind of, and we talked about, remember, projection, right? And so we're putting unacceptable thoughts onto someone else. So if you're constantly accusing others of doing things you want to be doing or making them wrong for doing certain things that you want to be doing, that's a way that's kind of showing that your defense mechanisms are working. Oftentimes they are, right, in adulthood, but that they're not benefiting you in that moment. Another way is a person having difficulties paying attention or daydreaming. That may be a sign of dissociation. Another defense that we didn't talk about. But, if there's a child that has experienced a lot of trauma and they've learned how to go to their happy place, that may be dissociation. So you're an adult, people are talking to you, and you're just in your own world because that's what makes you feel safe. That's an unhealthy way, right? That your defenses are kind of showing up. And very natural, very unconscious, understand it just happens. And so we want to just kind of bring that to our attention. If you're avoiding people, places, or things, defense mechanism is avoidance. Another one could be, well, you often get angry or irritable with family members, or you're difficult at work, displacement. So, these are just a few examples of how it can be showing up in unhealthy ways.
Thank you for that, Dr. Anderson. And as we start to bring the show to a close, I always want to leave people with hope and leave them at least with a pathway, because everything is on a scale, and when you get to the point where now this is troublesome, now I can't figure this out on my own. When is it time to seek professional help? When is it time to seek a therapist like yourself? And what are those treatment options? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. And so again, we recognize that we all have defense mechanisms. Some can become a bit more extreme than others. If we see folks that may respond a lot more in regards to like displacement, right? That shows up as like anger or irritability. And so treatment for that may be like anger management, right? If denial is resulting in like abuse and like substances, right? They may benefit from information or support group or recovery group or Alcohol Anonymous or things like that, right? So it really kind of depends on the defense mechanism, right? Because we generally lean on one more than the other, but again, as we saw earlier, many of them can exist at different times in our lives. And so
Dr. Anderson, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Would you say that depending on the defense mechanism and how it's disrupting your daily life, there's different options of different treatment styles? It's not just like, I got a defense mechanism problem and, there's let's sit down and talk about it kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good, the way, and you said this earlier, remember we talked about when things become unconscious, the ways in which it manifests in our lives shows up differently. And so again, if we've had certain childhood experiences that we're not addressing, that we're either suppressing, regressing, all those things, that doesn't mean that the information or the experiences cease to exist. It just means that it's on an unconscious level. And when things are unconscious, they'll manifest themselves in other ways. So it can show up as irritability or anger or anxiety or depression, deep in sadness. It can show up as promiscuity. It can show up as disconnect, right? Dissociation, right? So if we're not conscious of those experiences, it's still operating in your life, and that's what I think is really important for people to understand. It's operating in your life and we can't, turn it off and just act as if it doesn't exist, right? So with therapy, a lot of it is really kind of just getting an idea of how one's defense mechanisms are operating in their lives overall and, what that looks like. And then setting up a program around what they may need. And a lot of it is slowly kind of bringing up that unconscious in a safe way, so we can get to the root cause of what's triggering those defenses, right? And bring truth to them and allow the individual to recognize that although this was adaptive and something that you took on as survival, it's to know you're not that little girl or little boy anymore that has to silence their voice or ignore their truth, or daydream to go to your happy place, right? And so therapy looks like that, and it's just, again, it varies from person to person depending on what defense mechanism is coming up the most often. Next, I just want to shift into the final thoughts of today's show. First, I just really hope this was helpful. I hope that it really kind of gave light to how we as humans are not alone, number one. And number two, that we are constantly learning and wanting to be and do better. And my encouragement to everyone watching is to just do your work. A lot of things can come up through journaling, right? You don't have to have a prompt to journal. You can simply just sit down and write out your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, what you want to change, your intentions, right? And listening to your inner child and letting it come up and what it needs to say, because that's how we awaken the unconscious. Because again, it's still there. We just have to give light to it. Okay. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being present today. Next week is our final show for the time being. As we know, I am prepping for motherhood. And so next show is just going to be exciting, and we'll catch up and just really talk about the works that we have done thus far, how we want to continue the great work we're doing, and just give you all another great show. So see you on Saturday at 11 a.m. Thank you so much.
For more than 40 years, Boston Scientific has relied on our spirit of relentless innovation to advance science for life. We have the privilege and responsibility to deliver higher quality, less invasive, and more accessible device solutions, and the need has never been greater. Boston Scientific technologies are used to treat roughly 30 million patients around the world each year. Across our business, our products are supported by vast clinical data, including bench testing, randomized controlled trials, and ongoing real-world evidence to ensure the highest quality products make it into the hands of our customers. And we're always looking for ways to provide even more effective therapies and solutions. We invest over $1 billion annually in research and development to sustain a robust pipeline of meaningful innovations. We continuously strengthen our manufacturing and operations capabilities with artificial intelligence and advanced microelectronics to create devices that are smaller and smarter. And we're collaborating with our medical partners and physicians to advance digital capabilities with remote device support and a broad scope of training and education programs. Advancing science for life is also about supporting our employees and the communities in which we operate. Now more than ever, we rely on our values to guide our company as a global business and as a global corporate citizen. We're working to help confront healthcare inequities and social injustice, not only with financial contributions, but through volunteer service, advocacy, and expanding market accessibility. We're also focused on environmental initiatives that move us towards our goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2030. The unmet needs are great, but the future of healthcare is bright. Our innovation centers provide a place to explore opportunities, examine solutions, and see what lies ahead for medicine. Together, we can continue the relentless pursuit of innovation to help everyone live longer, healthier lives and make a difference all over the world.